it comes to knowledge, my people are the livest, creators, providers, proudly striving. Take notes to this historical approach about freedom, education, beautiful black faces now. Take a ride with me, we cruising down history lane, where you might hear about greatness, survival, and even pain of some of the coolest people you can name, like Robert Smalls, William Steele, Robert Church, Ida B. Wells. That's just a few between the streets that you can do.
Welcome back, fam, to the Political Education for Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Nitra, and today we're going to talk about the very foundations of our democracy. Have you ever wondered how a bill really becomes a law, or what checks and balances actually keeps in check? Well, stick around because we're unpacking all that and more. If you think politics is just about elections and speeches and the president, you might be surprised by how much action happens behind the scenes and sometimes right under our noses. Before we get started, make sure you follow us on all social and streaming platforms at Educate to Free Us. And hit the like button, share, and subscribe to keep up with all our content. Your support helps us keep this conversation going and growing. So we done back how the three branches operate, how they interact, and how they keep the wheels of our government turning. So let's jump right in. Okay, so in the United States, our federal government is divided into three branches: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branch. Did an episode yesterday where I talked a little bit about that. So even still, with speaking of presidential immunity, I did bring up a little bit about the three branches. But today we're gonna do a deeper dive into the three branches of government. This system was designed by the founders to ensure a balance of power, preventing any single branch from dominating the government. This is a little bit what I talked about with the episode on presidential immunity. And granting immunity sort of gives the executive branch a little bit more dominating power over the other two branches, especially if it's politicized, and we'll get into that in just a second. So, of course, the executive branch is headed by the president. This branch is responsible for enforcing the laws. When we vote for a president, we are putting faith in them that they will assemble a good enough cabinet to be able to handle all the tasks of running a government. Then we have the legislative branch, or Congress, which is bicameral. That's consisting of two houses, the Senate and the House. This branch makes all laws, controls federal spending, and has the power to declare war, among other duties. So the president does not declare war. Congress declares war. And that was strategically done that way so that we don't have one person deciding if a whole country is going to go to war. It's something that should be weighed by a lot of different individuals, and it's something that should be taken a lot more serious than just one guy being pissed off at a country, so he want to bomb it to hell. So then we have the judicial branch, which includes the Supreme Courts and other federal courts. Now, this branch interprets the laws and can overturn laws they deem unconstitutional. System is crucial for preventing any branch from accumulating too much power, and ensures that the voices of the American people are represented through various avenues. So the Supreme Court, or the courts, right? So the federal courts, those are again appointed by the president. They're confirmed by the Senate. when we elect the president, we are saying, or we're putting faith into that person that they will put the right people in positions to reflect how the overall country is feeling or the sentiment, basically what the people want. In the United States, our federal government is designed across three branches, like I said. The framework wasn't just a spur of the moment decision, but it was well thought out, structured, intended to ensure balance of power by the founding fathers with understanding of governments. The executive branch administers public policy that include directing government operation, vetoing laws, negotiating treaties, and commanding the military. It was established with the notion of having a single strong leader who could respond decisively in times of national crises, yet constrained enough to prevent tyranny, right? This is what some people actually want to go back to, which is in direct opposition of what the founders wanted. They did not want they didn't want a king. They were very clear about that. And they wanted other people to be able to check the president. They understood that it was a powerful position, and power changes people. So they felt like by not giving too much power to the president, but giving them some, but then also balancing out the power with the other two branches. So Congress was established with the Great Compromise. During the Constitutional Convention, it intended to balance the interests of both large and small states. So, and that's more I could get into there, but I don't think I will. The Senate represents states equally with two senators each, while the House of Representatives represents the populations, adjusting with population changes. So if this state had population increases, well, then they would redraw the maps. That's redistricting. They redraw the maps and then they would either add seats or take away seats. So Congress's primary role is making laws and representing the people's will through writing those laws, right? And then you have the judicial branch. This is the Supreme Court, federal courts. They interpret the laws, ensure they are applied fairly across all states and to all individuals. Judicial review is not explicitly outlined in the Constitution, was established in Marbury v. Madison, which set the precedent that laws could be deemed unconstitutional if they conflict with the Constitution. The founders didn't want anyone to be more powerful, and they were bitter about being under the rule of kings. So they tried to do anything that was necessary or anything that they felt could keep a balance within the government. The one thing they did not want was one branch being more powerful than the other. They wanted to make sure that the branch would equal balance power, and they wanted to make sure that there was a way that the branches could check on each other or prevent the other from becoming more powerful or too powerful. So you have things like veto power or overriding the veto. They felt that those things would maintain a stable and fair government. Thoughts of the founding fathers on political parties reveal a dichotomy, right? George Washington warned against the baneful effects of the spirit of party, expressing concerns that partisan fighting could lead to tyranny. He wasn't lying. He saw it written on the walls. Despite that, the rise of political parties seemed almost inevitable given the diverse opinions and how the new country should be run. but also how democracy works. Democracy is not just government. You make your homes, your life may be a type of democracy. Let's say y'all want something to eat. Everybody gets an equal vote. Well, if the majority rules, if there's more people going for this food item, they won the vote because they had the most, right? And then let's say there isn't a majority, let's say it's all equal. Well, then you go back and you'd have to vote again, or some people would communicate with each other and try to come up with a compromise to actually to decide on something, because it can't be not it can't just be left up in the air. You have to eat, right? So, and you can do sometimes what I do, which is just act like a dictator and like, no, this is what we're eating because this is what I'm cooking. End of story. If you have a more democratic approach, then you'll get everybody's opinion or everybody's uh thoughts or feelings. The Federalists and the Democratic Republicans emerged representing centralized federal authority and states' rights, respectively. So the polarization only deepened in modern times. Right now, it's way more polarized than it was before. Now it's not even just polarized. I think it's even worse than picking teams right now, because I was gonna say I don't know anyone that sort of ridicule or tease folks for having a certain team, but I guess that's not true. I mean, if you're a Cowboys fan, I mean, I know people who just laugh at Cowboys fans all the time. But then, too, I think Cowboys fans deserve it. So, because they are like the biggest fans, win or lose. It's like, what the heck? I guess it just wasn't a thing. Like, politics is the sexy, controversial thing right now. It's not sexy in the sense that people want to learn about it. It's sexy because people get emotionally involved, they get upset, they want to fight. I think that was Trump. Man, it was so many people that were divorcing over something as something we would think is minuscule. As it's so polarized right now, there is no middle. Like, there, you can't say there's a center. That doesn't exist. That's a complete fabrication. There's no center. You can't toe the line in between two. One side has really just made it very clear what they're about. It's not about equality. Let's say that. It's not even really about governing. And I talked about that before in previous episodes. The party challenges the original hopes of George Washington of not being partisan, but it shows how democracy changed. It doesn't stay the same, even though they envisioned something that didn't necessarily mean that it was going to stay that way, which they did. They too understood that as well. That's why there's certain things you could do and change with the Constitution. When we understand these concepts, it helps us to appreciate the complexity of the system established. It also helps us understand what's going on within democracy, especially right now. People are so hyper focused on politics, but they're uninformed on the functionings just of government, which is no fault of their own. They don't teach us how governments function. Let's get into the inner workings of Congress. Let's talk about how Congress operates on a daily basis, right? Because they don't just operate when we see them on TV or when they come in campaign. It's a lot more that goes into that, which It's like us going to work every day, although they don't go to work every day, honestly. So it's made up of two houses, the Senate and the House. Each has its own leadership and committees that play crucial roles in the legislative process. The Senate is headed by the Vice President, who acts as the President of the Senate. The House is led by the Speaker of the House, one of the most influential figures in American politics is the Speaker of the House. That position should not be given to just any old person, right? So the committee system in both chambers is where much of the legislation groundwork is done. So committees review bills, they hold hearings, and amend legislation before it goes out to the full chamber for debate and voting. Simply how a bill becomes a law, right? And I'll go back a little bit on some of the details about committees and so a bill can be introduced in either house except for revenue bills which must originate in the house. After introduction is referred to the appropriate committee which studies it and makes some changes if needed. If the committee approves the bill, it moves to the floor for debate and a vote. If it passes, it goes to the other chamber for a similar process. If both houses pass the bill, it goes to the president who can then sign it into law or veto it. If in a perfect world, everything went smoothly, it would just it would be introduced, go to the committee makes changes, approves it, goes to the floor, they vote on it, it passes the vote, goes to the other chamber. Usually it's normally, well, lately we've been seeing a lot go from the House to the Senate. I've seen a few that went the other way, but mainly it's from the House to the Senate. So on the surface, that's how it goes. We do have to still understand that Congress has some key responsibilities and powers, understanding that some of their powers can be executed independently of the executive branch, which is the president, while others require presidential involvement. Now, that can also, there's a stopgap for that too. The committees is, of course, where the initial research and development and then final drafting of legislation. So the committees specialize in specific areas. You have defense, you have budget, you have education, and it's the idea is to choose committee members in Congress who are familiar with those areas or who have some expertise in the area. The way I put it, everybody can't have a professional life before they go into Congress in that sense, which is fine because Congress, anyone should be able to ascend to office. At least have the right people around them for those specialized areas like defense, budget, education, stuff like that. That's what we would hope. That's not always true. That's just, I mean, I don't know what's Lauren Boebert's expertise. I don't know. Getting felt up in the movie theater. Like, I don't know. Going to the movies, watching Beetlejuice. I don't know what her expertise are. I just really don't know. I don't know what Marjorie Taylor Greene's is. I think she owned a gym. So like where does that fall? Like what expertise is that? Small business? I don't I'm not I'm really laughing, but it's almost like this is sad because that wasn't the case before. They just didn't go get fools to write laws. You need some level of specialized training to be able to do this. But whatever those specialized area, they review the legislation, they hold hearings to gather information and opinions from experts. They amend the proposals before they go to the full chamber for debate. So it is their job to reach out to experts for these areas there that they are not specialized in. So you don't put a fool in there who thinks they know everything and don't know shit.
Is an abuse of that separation of power, because that rule is not something that Congress has delegated, but the ATF has taken it upon itself to regulate this rule that they created to make millions of Americans felons.
With respect, I was trying to answer your question before you interrupted me to say that the ATF had, in each of these instances, sufficient statutory authority from Congress, and that any challenges to that.
Ms. Katzen, it is my time. So Congress never authorized the ATF to ban pistol braces. Congress never authorized the ATF to do that, to make millions of Americans felons overnight. And so I would go back to your statement that you said in your testimony that these agencies are not free agencies and they can only do which Congress has delegated to them to do.
Congress is not
Ms. Katzen,
specific. Excuse me.
Thank you. My time. No, ma'am, it's my time. Thank you.
Oh, I'm
Ms.
sorry.
Katzen,
So you are not
in your
interested in my views.
It is my time. Thank you.
I do come prepared to committee, and then there's always somebody from this side that does something ridiculous that throws me all the way off. So, Jesus. Okay, so this is where we're going to start, Ms. Kaskin. First of all, let me apologize because that was uncalled for. So let me do what she would never do, which is to be an adult in this room or in this chamber. So let me start with some nonsense that she was trying to spew. And unlike Ms. Boebert, I am legally trained, and I've passed a few bar exams, and I also legislated before I got here. So I do want to start with correcting the record a little bit, and if you want to add to that, please do. There was conversation about ATF because my colleagues love to talk about their guns, baby. And I'm from Texas, so let me be clear. I also own firearms. Let me scream. Democrats own guns too. Let me make it clear. I own guns and I'm licensed to carry. That is a regulation. Regulations aren't necessarily bad. It didn't stop me from being able to get a gun. So we were talking about, or y'all were talking about the ATF, which I wasn't going there. I didn't plan to go there. But you know what? I honestly wish the ATF would run amok, because we know that seemingly the people that run this chamber don't have the courage to come up with one of the things we've heard is common sense regulations when it comes to guns. And to be clear, our Constitution, the Second Amendment, anticipates people having common sense. Unfortunately, we have not done that, and unfortunately, it has cost us lives. So when you were testifying a little bit earlier, you talked about unintended consequences and the fact that we are supposed to be able to anticipate that as lawmakers when we are writing laws. Unfortunately, not only have we ignored the unintended consequences, but we've got foreseeable consequences that are continually ignored. And that is why we are talking about regulation, at least on this side of. I am going to allow you the courtesy of expounding upon what it was that you were talking about with these agencies, which is pretty much what I understood, which is they only did what they were delegated to do, because if ATF could do more, I'm sure that we would actually get rid of the assault rifles that are constantly killing our babies every single day in this country. But go ahead.
People that are knowledgeable in that field. Let's put it like that. You would hope. We're seeing right now more and more, but as the days go, that is not what's happening. The former president, Donald Trump, is on trial in New York for falsifying business records and campaign finance laws. That's came out in his trial is in his cabinet, he hired, I think she was there's two things that she did. She was the White House press secretary. Okay. She was the communications director over his campaign. And this is Hope Hicks, if I didn't say her name. If I did, I forgot that fast. She was 28, I think, because she may be younger than that. But she was 28 at the time. She testified in trial last week or so that she thought Donald Trump was joking when he asked her to become the communications director over his campaign. And she was even more shocked. She said she laughed. She thought it was a joke when he asked her to be the press secretary. She admitted herself she had no prior training. She had no idea what she was doing in that job, and she was not fit to hold that position. Talk about DEI. I mean, affirmative action. Like they we know what they're saying now, right? That's their thing right now. Everything bad that happens, it happens because of diversity, equity, inclusion, and affirmative action. As if bad shit wasn't happening before DEI and before affirmative action. It's no fucking way if we didn't even have access to any of these positions that we allowed shit to happen when we wasn't even in those positions. So what do you say about the people who were in the positions and we wasn't and shit was happening? What do you say about that? Was that DEI too? Or was it only DEI when black people it, it was only when black people were introduced? That's really what you're trying to say. You're not saying DEI. You're really not talking about the idea or the real reason for or the need for diversity, equity, and inclusion. You're just talking about you don't want black people in high positions. Just say that shit, y'all. I mean, I'm saying, wasn't they the ones who said Donald Trump gave them the free range to be able to say what the hell was on their mind? Why are they masking this shit as DEI? Just say it. We don't want black people in higher positions than us. So anytime if you black people are in the blacks, because I think that's what Trump calls us, the blacks. Um, anytime you black people are in high positions or in positions that we don't think you belong in, we're gonna say something is wrong because a black person was there. Just say that. Don't say no fuck. Don't say DEI. We come on, man. We never, nothing was ever handed to us. You two motherfuckers are too stingy. So stop trying to act like you handing us anything. You're not. Whatever it is that we get, we've earned it 10 times over. You are the ones that are handing people shit like a fucking 28-year-old who has no fucking experience in communications or the White House executive positions, and you give her a fucking job as an executive for the country. Like that's the biggest fucking DEI that to your definition or the biggest fucking form of affirmative of y'all's affirmative action that I've ever seen. Like just come on. Y'all are too stingy to be giving shit away. So you're not giving us anything. So just stop with that shit. Just stop it. It's pointless. Like we can see right through it. I don't know what you all are doing, trying to convince yourselves or make yourselves feel better. You're already fucking assholes. Just keep being assholes. Why are you trying to be politically correct right now? Or who feelings are you trying to save? Like, just say it. You don't want y'all motherfuckers the ones said y'all could say it. Say it. Shit. Like, don't try to mask the shit for me. Just come on with it. Come straight out with it. So going back to to that, I just had to go on my DEI rant. But these positions are supposed to hold experts. And then we vote in people who we believe is going to hire experts around them to run the country. But you have fucking idiots that are being elected into office and they're hiring little kids to do the job when there are very much qualified people out there. I don't care what color you are, black or white. But I guarantee you there was somebody way more qualified than fucking Hope Hicks. But let's get back to what the responsibilities of Congress. One of the responsibilities is the budget. So they manage the federal budget. Each year they have to pass a series of appropriation bills that fund the government for the following fiscal year. Now, these bills originate in the House Appropriations Committee. There's a committee there. And then proceed to the Senate. If Congress cannot agree on a budget, then they usually pass, you may have seen this more recently, continuing resolutions. And that just keeps the government operating temporarily. And the only thing that the continuing resolution does is prevent a government shutdown. That's it. So it's my belief that they just in there copy and pasting because I haven't seen in some time when they've actually settled on a budget. I've seen that they have just been passing continuing resolutions like every time. It's so that's what I've seen. A lot of more continuing resolutions. So government shutdowns, they happen when Congress fails to approve funding for government operations. Okay. Usually because of a disagreement over the budget or a specific appropriations bill. During a shutdown, non essential federal government offices close. Many employees are furloughed, and this could, of course, disrupt various services and have significant economic impacts. But Congress powers, aside from the president, is one, they can amend the Constitution. And then two, they can impeach a president. And then three is they can override a presidential veto. So Congress proposes amendments to the Constitution with a 2/3 majority in both the House and the Senate. Those amendments do not require the president's signature, but must be ratified by 3/4 of the states. So it's 50 states, and we need 38 states to ratify an amendment. Okay. So Congress can amend the Constitution, 2/3 majority in both House and the Senate. Don't require president's signature, must be ratified by 3/4 of the states, which is 38. Second thing, the House has the sole power to impeach federal officials, including the president, which the Senate can then try them. Of course, this process doesn't involve the president and can lead to the removal of office. The last thing, they can override a presidential veto. So if the president vetoes a bill, Congress can override the veto with two-thirds, with two-thirds, with the 2/3 vote in both chambers, which would then enact the bill into law despite the president's opposition. And so what Congress do need the president on is now they can, if they get the president's signature, then bam, they got it. Nothing else is needed. If they can't get it, then that's where they would have to take it to a vote to override the veto. This dynamic between Congress and the executive branch is crucial for the balance of power and is the fundamental aspect of this system of government. This is what the founders were trying to do with balancing the powers. They wanted to make sure that no single branch can govern unilaterally. Now, let's get into some other parts of Congress. And this is the rules of Congress. This is the part that everyone is very, very confused about, which is fine because it's confusing. But I don't know if a lot of people aren't doing their research, and I don't know if they even know what to research because this is not taught in school. I know I teach it. We don't teach rules of Congress in that whole section on government checks and balances. We don't get into it. We don't go that deep into it. That's one of the parts of the functions of government that you just don't see. So Congress operates under a complex set of rules that governs its proceedings. These rules dictate everything from how debate is conducted to how votes are cast. They're crucial because they help maintain order and ensure fairness in the legislative process, or so they say. Over the years, the rules have evolved. For example, the nuclear option has changed the way senators approve federal judges, including Supreme Court judges and Supreme Court justices, reducing the need for a supermajority. These rules aren't just procedural, they can influence legislative outcomes and reflect the political climate at any given time. Their flexibility allows Congress to adapt to new changes and challenges, although not always without controversy. And there's also a downside to that. And here's just a little bit of background on those rules. They were established with the First Continental Congress. The idea was influenced by British parliamentary procedures and colonial governance practices. The rules were quite simple before. They were just designed to facilitate early legislative needs. But of course, over time, as the nation and its legislative complexities grew, so did the rule book. Today, each new Congress adopts its own rules, though many are based on those of previous sessions. They adopt their own rules. So, when does that happen? Like what, every 2 years? So each time there's a new Congress that's voted upon, after they're sworn in, then the majority party decides on the rules that will govern their proceedings. That's typically one of the first actions taken by the new Congress. The majority party, I'll say it again, the majority party plays a crucial role in shaping the rules, which are sometimes a reflection of the current political and legislative climate. Rules can be changed during a session if a majority agrees to modify or temporarily suspend them. So there's differences between the House and the Senate. They have their own rules. The House have their own rules. The Senate have their own rules. The House has 435 members. It has stricter rules to manage the large number of legislators. For example, debate on most bills is limited to expedite the process. Now, in contrast, the Senate is only 100 members. It allows for more extended debate periods, exemplified by practices like filibuster, which can delay or block legislation unless 60 senators vote to end it. Here's two examples of how the rules can impact legislation. So the filibuster in the Senate allows a minority of senators to extend debate indefinitely, effectively halting progress on a bill. It's a powerful tool for the minority, but can significantly slow down legislative actions. Now, with the filibuster, there's a few things that changed with the filibuster. Now, initially, you would have to speak in Congress or be on the floor the entire time for the filibuster to actually serve its purpose. Then they started doing this where you didn't even have to be there. They changed the rules where you could just send an email and say, "Yeah, I'm filibustering it." And that's that simple. So before you would have members on the in the House, I mean in the Senate testifying for hours upon hours delaying, bills. Of course, time ran out for them, right? They couldn't be up there delaying for forever indefinitely. But then when you send an email, I mean, the email doesn't have an expiration. So it's like, bam, once that email is sent, that's it. That's what's happening with the filibuster right now. They are sending emails filibustering bills, which means they're not doing nothing. That I mean, that's the real problem people have with the filibuster. Now, the Senate has the option to go back to the normal rules where you had to actually filibuster on the floor and sit there and speak for however many hours or whatever. But yeah, that's the problem now with the filibuster. They can have closed rules. The rules committees, the rules committees set a closed rule for a bill. This prohibits any amendments. This can speed up legislative process, but limits the debate and the ability of a minority member to alter legislation. So those are two examples on how a rule can actually impact the legislative process, also impacting the function of the government. Now, something that happens, we've been seeing it happen now much more often, ties in the Senate. You'll have split party lines 50-50. Where party lines are equally split in committees or in the Senate, the rules become more crucial. If the Senate is split 50-50, the vice president, who also serves as the president of the Senate, casts a tie-breaking vote. In committees, ties often mean a motion or a bill fails unless further negotiation leads to a change in votes. So you sort of start the process over, or y'all get down to business and start making some shit happen so that there can be a majority to be able to pass that bill or get it out of committee. If it's a split 50-50, the process of deciding the rules becomes even more complex and requires careful negotiation and sometimes reliance on existing rules to manage the tie-breaking process. It doesn't work all the time, but that's the reason for them having a body and being able to negotiate. You can't just be one track. That's not happening. You're going to have to negotiate in Congress. And that's really that's the problem in the House right now. There's one side is not willing to compromise. They're just not. And if they do compromise, they are the mortal enemy of their party. So with the 50-50 split, like I said before, it's happened. Vice President Kamala Harris, I believe she's voted the most times to pass legislation where there's been a 50-50 split. But because we had the executive branch, which the vice president is the president over the Senate, then that vote that her, well, because Vice President Kamala Harris, now her making the tie-breaking vote essentially gives the Democrats the majority. So there's always going to be to figure out that 50-50. That's only for passing legislation. That's not for deciding the rules. So if there's a 50-50 split, they got to figure this shit out. At the start of a new Congress, when there's a change like a 50-50 split, both parties typically negotiate on organizing resolution. That's what I was talking about before. This sets the terms for how the Senate will operate, and it includes agreements on the composition of committees, and it requires negotiation from both parties on a sort of power sharing arrangement, which can influence everything from what legislation gets priority to how the committees are chaired. Because remember, I said before, the committees have a chair. Each committee has the chair. So let's see. Let me think of, it's gonna go back, think of a time when we needed 2001, maybe 2001 to 2003. The Senate adopted an organizing resolution that gave equal representation for both parties on committees. So they shared staff resources equally. They established procedures that facilitated cooperative management of the Senate's business. And that similar to the arrangements from the last Congress, or the not the last one, the 117th Congress. I think we're on the 18th or the 19th now. I don't know. I don't think it matters. So the leadership from both parties typically engage in these negotiations to reach consensus on the organizing resolution. The process can be delicate. It requires compromise on both sides to ensure Senate functions smoothly. The leaders of both parties, usually the majority and minority, play key roles in negotiation, balancing interests with the operational needs of the Senate. This is what I've been screaming about for years now. It may have been since 2003, but I've been screaming about it more and more lately, because the idea of introducing a third party into this political process somehow is convincing people that this will save the dysfunction of the democracy. It doesn't. It won't save it. People are constantly saying that we need third parties. We need third parties. It doesn't matter if you have a third party or not. The power is going to be split two ways: majority and minority. That's it. The majority party is the one who has the upper hand, because, like we are just talking about right now, they are the ones that decide the rules. So look at how these rules can have significant impact on how the laws are passed or how the government functions, just period. These rules can make or break a Congress. These rules can shut down a government or not shut down a government. Like, these rules play a significant part. And when there isn't consensus with parties, they fall more heavily on the rules. If there's like nobody's budget, well, then let's go to the rules and see how we supposed to handle this shit. And so these rules of this real crucial, especially right now, to understand how these rules affect us. So when we say stuff like the Democrats need to pass a bill that's for all black people only. Well, if the Democrats don't have the majority, sir, ma'am, they can't pass shit. Because the party that's in the majority won't let them. That's how they work. They like, nah, I got the majority now. So now like, I think this last Congress, their whole thing was get them back for doing all the shit that that they did to us when they had the majority. We gonna get them back. That's all they've done. They haven't done nothing as far as governing. They just doing like petty shit. Like they kicked Nancy Pelosi shit out of her office. Like after they won the majority, they was like, "Nah, her shit got to go." And she was like gone to, I think, a funeral or some shit. And they was like, "Nah, pack her shit up." Like that's the most that they've done. Like I don't understand. It's like fucking 5-year-olds in Congress. Like that shit ain't even that serious, dude. Like it's way more pressing shit that y'all need to be worried about. Instead of you kicking Nancy Pelosi out of her desk. They shitted on the fucking desk anyway. They shitted all in the office. Your people shitted all throughout that office, and you are in here flexing the office like, get your shit. No, you tell your people to come get they shit. Cause it's literally they shit on the walls. Like you doing all this for nothing. I don't understand. This too much, sir. Is you doing the most. So with and just that just goes back to the whole majority versus minority. That's two sides. Pick the side you want to be on. Do you want to be on the side with the majority, or do you want to be on the side with the minority? It's that simple. Don't even worry about the parties. You just make sure that you actually have a voice within either that majority or minority. Hopefully it is the majority. Make sure that you have a voice, that you're represented when this particular party is in power. I wouldn't even cling to the party, just cling to the one that has the power. Go in there and try and make change, or at least put your agenda on their radar. If you can't even do that, then we have to go back to the drawing board and get people in there that's actually gonna do stuff for the people. And in all honesty, I think people think that's too hard of a job. And so the easy thing is to say, let's make a new party. That's too easy. Just get in there and do the work to get people out of office. Yeah, the shit is hard work and it can be expensive, but everybody got one vote. So, shit. Now, 50-50 splits can force bipartisanship since it needs some level of cross party support, but it can lead to more moderate policy decisions. And let me see, they could be what I would consider watered down bills that really don't have teeth. They really don't do much. That's typically what happens when nobody's willing to compromise. So in a 50-50 split, rules are decided through a combination of vice presidential tie-breaking, negotiated organizing resolution, and established precedents. All of these things require bipartisanship of some degree and negotiation that would otherwise be necessary. So this can ensure that the Senate continues to function despite there's a partisan divide. Now, the rules of Congress are not just procedural formalities. They deeply influence which policies are considered and passed. Like I was just saying before, they can be strategically used to either fast track legislation or by limiting debate or to delay through amendments, extended discussions, and so on and so forth. These rules are necessary for anyone following or impacted by federal legislation. They can really make a real difference, like I said before. There are some people who are cold with those rules. Like they know those rules like the back of their hand and they use them for their benefit. In some cases, they don't. That's like Now, this current speaker that we have, Mike Johnson from Louisiana, he may not even be in his position long because the speaker before him, which was Kevin McCarthy, well, agreed on the rules because, of course, there is a new Congress. The majority party agreed on the rules. The rules that they agreed on said that one person from their caucus, from their party, can file a motion to remove them from the position. One. Now before, so it just depends. So each Congress decides on those rules. They can decide where no, you need a majority to remove a speaker, or you need 2/3 of the party vote to remove a speaker. They may say they could think whatever it is that it was. I can't remember what it was before, but it was not one. It was not one person. That means if you have one person from your caucus that's your mortal enemy, the minute you get the position, they can go in there and request your ass to be removed. And that's exactly what happened with Kevin McCarthy. And now that they have Speaker Johnson, he is still at the he's still held up by those same rules unless they propose to change them, which I don't remember, it's the majority party, the party that's in the majority, they're the ones that's deciding on the rules. The minority party really don't do much. They can't do much because they don't have the power to do much. So they can't go in and say, "No, you need to write your rules like this." Come on, man. They kicked Nancy Pelosi out of her office. You really think they finna let the other party come in and tell them how to run their rules? Like, people were telling Kevin McCarthy, like, that's a dumbass, that's a dumbass deal. But he wouldn't listen. I mean, he was just so big on becoming Speaker of the House. I guess he got that one on that notch on his belt. I mean, I doubt he'll ever be one again. So okay, so the rules, okay. Then okay, so we talked about that. Let's see. Okay, so the Senate, now the Senate rules and um organizational resolutions functions a little bit different. So the Senate operates under a continuing body principle. That means that it considers its rules to continue from one Congress to the next unless they are explicitly changed. The changes to the Senate rules requires a vote, typically needs a simple majority to pass, but altering fundamental aspects like filibuster requires supermajority, which is why such changes are rare. Both chambers, they have the party leaders and caucuses, they play roles in shaping the rules. Before the rules are drafted, discussions and negotiations occur within party caucuses to ensure that the needs and strategies of the party members are reflected. So everyone kind of go into their huddle, they come up with a plan, they come back. Of course, then you have the party leader who then negotiates that. It's not just one person making all the decisions. If they are an active member of Congress, they should be participating in this process. Okay, so I think I talked about before with the Senate rules changing when they lowered the vote threshold for confirming Supreme Court nominees to just a simple majority. I think I talked about this. I don't remember. That was something that recently happened. It allowed for faster confirmations under less bipartisan, but also reflecting deepening partisan divides. Rules that require higher thresholds for certain actions can encourage compromise and bipartisanship in some cases. Unless you get all the people right now, it's like the only way you can get stuff done is by having all of this, having enough seats, having 2/3 of the seats or 60 in the Senate. Nobody is crossing lines. Nobody's crossing party lines. It hasn't happened for some time. Now, understanding the mechanics behind the rules helps us understand the procedural working of our legislative bodies. And it's also helpful for us to highlight these power dynamics so then we can develop political strategies. That's why we need to know information about the rules, because we can't just be screaming to each other or screaming at each other about what someone or a member needs to do without us knowing what they're able to do based on what the rules are. We have to know that first. We can't just go in there demanding shit without knowing all of the information. The rules play a big part of that. We have to know it as voters. I mean, us thinking, I mean, that's just, if you've never worked for the government before, honestly, thinking that stuff moves quickly in the government is just, that's just naive. It takes shit a long time. It takes it a long time for it to work. And just explaining this should give people some insight in how and why this shit takes so long. Cause look at what's happening. Everyone is not agreeing on everything. We just have to be honest about that. That's not happening. The rules set the tone for the legislative operations and can impact the legislative success or not, or not, because right now we're not successful. This Congress is not. Budget reconciliation is another example of implication of rule changes in Congress. Okay, so this is a process in the Senate that allows for expedited consideration for certain tax, spending, and debt limit legislation. Here's how procedural rule changes can have implications on reconciliation. The other day, I had a real good discussion about the current events, and mainly, specifically, the student protests, the war in Gaza with the Palestinian people and Israel. It's a little sad, but may need to help us understand this so then we can either support them in however within our capacity, or sort of help them to understand, to be able to negotiate or try and negotiate what it is that they want. Now, I'm not sure their demands are more about their schools instead of the government. On the smaller scale, it's more about their school. On the larger scale, it's more about the government. So, you have immediate and future demands. So, one of the things that they've been speaking more about is the money. This government funding genocide. I hate to break it to them, but this government has always supported genocide, has been supporting genocide since the beginning, since its founding. Them wanting this country to stop funding this genocide, they'd have to understand how the budget and the defense budget, how it works, how it's approved, how the funds are allocated, budget reconciliation, because we know that's Congress's job to establish the budget. Budget reconciliation is a legislative process originally intended to make it easier to adjust revenue and expenditure levels to control budget deficit. It was established as a part of the Congressional Budget Act of 1974 and has been amended several times since. This is how it works. Reconciliation bills can be passed with a simple majority in both the House of Representatives and the Senate, bypassing the need for a supermajority to overcome a filibuster in the Senate. This means that as long as a party holds at least 51 seats in the Senate, or 50 with the vice president available to cast the tiebreaking vote, it can pass significant fiscal legislation without any support from the minority party. It enables the majority party to pass substantial budget related policies that may be impossible to enact under a normal circumstance where a 60 vote majority is required. And this can be controversial. Anything partisan, well, it used to be anything partisan was controversial. Now it's not. It doesn't matter. I mean, now everything is partisan. So here's an example of the Trump administration in 2017. Significant changes to the Affordable Care Act had been enacted through reconciliation and reflecting shifts in policies that align strictly with the majority party's goals. In 2017, with the Trump administration, they were able to pass their tax cut with just having simple majority. Wasn't necessary for them to have 2/3 of the legislature to pass anything like tax legislation. In this case, it was tax cuts. So the tax cuts didn't go to us. I hate when people say, I'm just worried about my taxes. Your taxes ain't. Come on, man. If you worried about your taxes and you talking to me, I don't know nobody. I don't know nobody who taxes are that are, high like that. Like you're not Warren Buffett. You're not Tyler Perry. Like it I can see them talking to each other, but you talking to me, like I'm sorry, sir, ma'am, you're not in that tax bracket. Stop it. Just stop it. That tax bracket that's only like 1% of the country is in that high tax bracket. Because reconciliation allows for major legislative changes with only simple majority, it also means that changes can be relatively easily reversed or altered when the opposing party gains a majority. So that can lead to policy volatility, and where we know critical laws, especially those affecting taxes, healthcare can fluctuate significantly with the political tides. And with Congress, we know what that changes every 2 years or something. I think I just said the Senate terms are 6 years, but they all don't come up for reelection at the same time. So you could have a sort of volatility within policy with every 2 years. It's sort of teetering on either side. And then I already said they childish. So when the other side come in, they like, get your shit up out my office. So imagine them as far as policy. They kicking people out the offices and shit. They damn sure is making policy changes. They coming in on the first day. This is our plan for policies with this Congress. All we need to know is what your party did last Congress. Whatever your party did last Congress, My party is reversing it. That's our plan. Bam. That's it. That's really how they kind of functioning right now. This volatility can complicate long-term planning for people, businesses, government agencies as policies change every few election cycles. It also undermines bipartisanship. Passing legislation through reconciliation reduces the incentive for trying to work with the others, divide the country even more, and diminish whatever is left, whatever spirit of compromise is left. It can diminish that, which is exactly what's happening right now. It also undermines the deliberative nature of the Senate. The Senate is historically known as the world's greatest deliberative body. Not today. That shit ain't happening. That shit is not happening today. It is not the world's greatest deliberative body right now. Um, Senate is a little bit more less childish than the House, but they still childish too. They all childish. Like they not trying to get shit done. Now budget reconciliation is really important when understanding how procedural rules can have lasting impacts on policy and politics. It's not just simple tweaks or procedural tweaks, they can actually reshape the political landscape and affect many citizens in very tangible ways that we can see. We know it. And again, knowing these rules can help us understand and develop better strategies for gaining and utilizing political power. I guess we now should have a better understanding of the rules and the procedures of Congress. The procedures serve as an operational backbone of legislative activity. It's structured to make sure that every law is the product of debate and consideration. However, the use of the procedures reflects the constant balancing act. Too restrictive, they can stifle necessary legislative action, and then too lenient, they can undermine the depth and quality of legislative oversight. I think we saw that through those CARES Act during that when COVID happened. So during the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s, the filibuster was frequently used by Southern senators. Um, an example is Strom Thurmond. Um, he holds the record for the longest filibuster, in which he conducted against the Civil Rights Act of 1957 for 24 hours and 18 minutes. I mentioned before how the Senate, they changed the voting threshold from 60 votes to just a simple majority to confirm Supreme Court justices, right? So that's one of the things that people are, I think it's an excuse, but they're saying like, no, we shouldn't change the filibuster because what happens when we're not in power? Well, the Republican Party has shown us what to do when you're in power. They change shit. And then when they lose power, they change it back. Like I mean, if Republicans wasn't doing that, then maybe that could be a good enough, I guess, excuse or reason for not doing it. But because they are doing this, then like to me, shit, do the same thing. Do it back to them. I mean, I don't get what the problem is. Okay. Yeah. So, filibuster, racist. Always been racist. Simple, right? Now we're going to move on to the next part, which it's my sort of favorite part of the program. This is my America is Racist segment. We So this I usually highlight a historical moment that is clear-cut racism um, in what it is, what happened, everything involved with it. It's usually no, it's always surrounding race. I developed this part because during this year during the Republican presidential primary, they just, got on this whole thing about America isn't racist, and one person was trying to out racist the other person by proving that America wasn't racist by being racist. And so I was like, you know what? I'm gonna just do something every time I record about how America is so racist. So let's see what we're talking about today. Okay, so today we're going to talk about just a little bit about the Memphis Massacre of 1866. I actually did an entire podcast about the Memphis Massacre. I went into real extensive details about what happened, the outcomes. So I won't do it today because if you want to know what happened, then you go back and listen to that episode called the Massacre of 1866. So just to sum it up, essentially after the following years after the Civil War, emancipated Black people saw refuge in different places. One of those places was Memphis, Tennessee. And that's one of the reasons Memphis, Tennessee had a Freedmen's Bureau there. And they also had federal troop presence, right? We know once Lincoln was assassinated, all of that just went to hell. So it happened on April 30th. It started off, it was a white officer tried to assault a Black Union soldier, and the soldiers just, um, those Black soldiers just posseed up like the something similar to the Mississippi boat brawl. The Mississippi boat brawl, like what was that, almost a year ago? So yeah, they assembled and was like, oh hell no, that's not gonna happen. One thing you should not do is try and mess with no Black men fresh out of the uniform. Like, sorry, sir, we learned everything. It doesn't take us very long. And we don't need weapons. You can ask your friend Jackson, Andrew Jackson, about the War of 1812. Anyway, that's another episode. So what started as, just uh, s- it was started as harassment, and Black people resisted to that harassment. And then, of course, white people did what white people normally do, is act like half primates. And they started on their spree of lies and just going after people for nothing. People who had no idea what was going on. They wasn't even from the place, didn't know what was happening. They still managed to somehow get involved. And it ended in a massacre where they killed people. But guess what? They didn't just kill people. They raped Black women. So that there, I still have yet to understand. If you want the violence, if you are just a violent person, okay, I'm not even, I'm not, I can't even deal with that. Let's just say you're just a violent person. You just like to tear shit up. Where does the sexual violence come from? Like you could just be the person who just like to beat motherfuckers up. I just like to punch people. When or how and why does it escalate to somehow sexual violence? To me, that right there is that's the part where they have yet to explain or to even try to just be straight up upfront about. And it stems from how they've treated us when they stole us. They didn't just steal us for our bodies, for our labor, but they also stole us to be their, to be their whatever. We were just we was at their, okay, I'll put it like this. During this time and sometime after, a long, long time after, it was not a crime for a white man to rape a black woman. It, however, was a crime for a black man to rape a white woman, right? So they didn't even see rape in itself is a crime. Does not matter. It is a crime. Doesn't matter what color the person is. It's a crime. But the sickness in them is that they allowed something so disgusting as rape. They allowed it just because this person was of another race that they created, because they created this shit race. So you would allow something so gruesome as that. And even if we, and I'm saying gruesome because it's, there are worse things. I don't know if I can say that. There, death is gruesome, but the perpetual rape to me is like, how can you sit next to a person that does that and you're sitting there knowing that they do it? There's something wrong with you. And they allow this. Yeah, their whole society's allowed it. They still allow it now. Even now, it's not even it's so racialized. It's just the idea of a rape victim having to just defend themselves. They not only have to defend themselves, and it's in most cases when it's women or when they're LGBTQ, they have to defend their sexual history. That's all. That's disgusting. It's like, why do my history need to be revealed when I'm not the one that's doing this shit? Anyway, they are the reason why this shit has evolved to this level. So, and in all these massacres, there were some sprinkles of rape throughout these stories. It would be killing of multiple people, multiple murders, and then there's like, oh yeah, and there's some rape in there too. It's like, how did that get in there? Like I can never understand it. I still can't understand it to this day. So they murdered, they raped, and then they burned up over 100 buildings. They burned down every single black church and school that was along that path. Guess what? Yep, the police participated. It wasn't just police that participated either. And if you go back and listen to that episode, I'll go into detail about who was involved in all of the riot and violence that was inflicted upon us. You can go back and listen to that episode. I also reveal the outcomes of it. I won't reveal it today. But yeah, this happened April 30th, 1866. And today we're still fighting against this same type of disregard of black lives. This history of Anti-blackness goes beyond words. It's woven into this American society. And it manifests in our systems, our policies, our everyday interactions. We talked about how it manifests in our policies. And just to be clear, this wasn't just a few bad apples or a momentary lapse in morality. No, this is America. This was America. This is America today. Systems designed to sustain white supremacy did exactly what they were meant to do: protect it and perpetuate it. Most white people at the time expressed regret, not for the massacre itself, but for the financial toll it took on the city. Mm-hmm. That sound familiar? You shouldn't be destroying property. It's a fucking building, man. In briefly bringing up the Memphis massacre, it's not just recounting history, but it's issuing a call to action. It's on us to dismantle these systems, to fight against them, and to fight against this ingrained racism that bleeds into today. Forward from this dark past to our current reality. Let's carry forward the determination of our ancestors to seek justice, not just for those lost in Memphis, but for every Black life impacted by America's legacy of racial terror. Is it? That is a wrap today, folks. Thanks for tuning in to Political Education for Freedom podcast. We covered a lot today, from the structure of our government to the specific procedures that keep Congress running. Remember, understanding these mechanisms is key to being an informed citizen, to develop political strategies, and to ultimately get what it is that we want and need from our government. Until next time, stay engaged, stay educated, and keep fighting for a better world. Till next time, y'all, peace, love, and politics.
Education, beautiful black faces now. Take a ride with me, we cruising down history lane, where you might hear about greatness, survival, and even pain of some of the coolest people you can name, like Robert Smalls, William Steele, Robert Church, Ida B. Well, that's just a few between the streets that you can do. When it comes to knowledge, my people are the livest, creators, providers, proudly striving. Take notes to this historical approach about freedom, education, beautiful black faces now. Take a ride with me, we cruising down history lane, where you might hear about greatness, survival, and even pain of some of the coolest people you can name, like Robert Smalls, William Steele, Robert Church, Ida B. Well, that's just a few between the streets that you can do.